All right, everyone, welcome to another episode. This is my first episode in the new house, and I'm honored that a #1 New York Times bestselling author and Kyle Mills is here to ring in this new episode with me, and he's got a new book out called Fade In that we're going to get into. But Kyle, thanks for coming on. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's kind of a monumental occasion. This is your first book out post Mitch Rapp and Vince Flynn and Fade In, and the hype, in my personal opinion, the hype is huge. Fade has been a character that I think people have really wanted to see again, and we're almost there. Of course, I have the book. You can see it over my shoulder, but fans will have it here in about a week or a couple of days after this episode publishes. But how does it feel to kind of stand out there again and be ushering Fade back into, the commercial world again?
Yeah, it's fun. It's definitely feels really new. I wrote for Vince for 10 years, and before that I had done 3 books for the Robert Ludlum franchise. So it's been a really long time since I could just write whatever I felt like about whoever I felt like. So a completely different experience with that and with the publishing of the book because now you're not kind of in the shadow or hiding behind another author. You're out there on your own. So it's been really interesting. I mean, and the industry has changed a lot in the, I guess, 15 years I've kind of, I don't know, in quotes, been away. I've been doing the legacy writing. So super interesting, super fun.
How does it feel to be kind of on kind of a different label? You're with Authors Equity now, which I want to pick your brain about and see what that's about. Kind of introduce that to the public. But what does it feel like to kind of be on another ship and be kind of looking across the bow and offering up another story with Authors Equity?
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, as far as the writing goes, I'd written a lot of books. I'd written 9 books for the Mitch Rapp series, and I felt like my arc was over. In fact, I kind of felt that way with the book prior to the last one that I wrote. Or the last one was Code Red, and the book prior to that. It's funny, but a lot of people emailed me and said, that was a great wrap up to the series. You did a great job, and all this. And I'm like, well, the series isn't over.
They were
but
sending you off
but
like,
in a
great
way,
job, Kyle. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
yeah, great job. But in a way, when I finished it, I thought the same thing. Not that it felt like a good time for this series to be over, but it felt like I had taken Mitch from point A to point B, and it felt like finished. I had one more book on my contract, so if you read Code Red, it reads very standalone. Like there's no additional arc to his characters, relationships, or anything like that. And
Yeah.
that was the reason. So I thought, it was kind of time to let someone else, in this case, Don Bentley, pick it up and see where they wanted to go with it. It was a perfect moment. And then I had this character, Fade, that I wrote about 20 years ago, who's kind of this Navy SEAL, former CIA operative, got screwed over by the government and was shot in the end of the first book, which published 20 years ago. And I don't know, I thought he was dead. And then years later, people really loved that character, and I loved the character. Years later, I thought, I remember I was out on a run and on a trail in the national park and near Tucson, and I kind of came up with a way he could have survived. But then it was a matter of waiting for the right story. And the world has changed so much since I started writing, even when I took over Vince's series, that it kind of, I think the story was right. Like the world is so chaotic now, so divided for weird reasons, sometimes nonsensical reasons. It just seems it's a weird place to be, right? For thriller now.
Yeah.
And he seemed like the perfect person to tell that story through because he's kind of funny and philosophical, and he gets swept up in things that he shouldn't, as opposed to a Mitch Rapp character who's, always the master of his universe.
So let's talk about author's equity because it's doing things a little bit different, and you're kind of a part of that. How did author's equity start, and what is kind of your role in it?
Yeah, so it was started by some industry executives who had left their positions at major publishers, and their idea was to have a very small company that they could keep their arms around, and that would try to do things a little differently. And so it's a very nimble company. It's starting up, so there's still everybody, and I feel like I'm in on the ground floor of it. Everybody's really open to new ideas and doing things in a different way, which is super fun. I mean, like, if you work with big publishers like I always have, and particularly if you're a legacy writer, you don't have much control over everything. But this, with authors equity, if I come up with a cool marketing idea or whatever, I can call them, and they're more likely to say, yeah, let's give that a try and execute it. So it fit perfectly for me because I knew where I wanted to go with this book. I had a fan base. They had I wanted to do something different, not only artistically, but it was really interesting to get on the ground floor of this company. I signed with them before they were even a company. I think
Really?
before they'd officially started. Yeah. So but I had talked to them, and they seemed really impressive and motivated to make this new model work. And so it's been great. Yeah, it's been really fun.
What is like a lesson learned that you have kind of gained from working in the Flynn estate, and now you've taken it forward, moving in kind of on your own and reintroducing Fade to the masses?
Yeah, lesson learned is I've just during that period I learned a lot about fans, interacting with fans, which was really not a thing as much, even when I 10 years ago, when I took more than 10, 12 years ago, when I took over that series, with your ability to meet fans and interact with fans on social media, and how important that is. You think about when I started, you didn't interact with fans at all. There's no way to do it. You went on tour and you met a few of your fans, and otherwise you had no idea who read your books. Every once in a while you get a
Yeah.
letter.
Yeah.
They'd send it to your publisher, and your publisher would forward it to you. So it is such a different business than when I started. Like, I feel like a dinosaur. I've written, I think this is my 25th book, and
Wow.
I just feel like it is absolutely night and day when you compare it to the business I got in when I was probably 30 or something.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of established writers across the thriller genre, in the broad sense, really starting to do different things on social media, email lists, the way they do, podcast appearances and all that because of the way media has changed and in getting and reaching that audience. And like you said, long time ago, the only way you reached an author was either via email, a letter, or if you caught them on tour. And and depending upon where you live, that was harder than you think of me. I don't live any closer to Dallas than 5 hours, so if anybody rolls through Dallas, I could go see them, but it's a 5 hour drive one way. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit different, and the world has really changed. But since the world has changed, what was it like for you approaching writing a new Fade story, knowing how much has changed from the things that you just mentioned for you personally, all the way to technology, and then you have this huge gap between the last Fade book. What do you do? How did you approach putting him into present day?
It was kind of interesting because you think about the Mitch Rapp series, how much history it has, like what a rich universe that is, that started a really long time ago. And so you have to keep up with all that. And there's only so many directions you can go because you've built that universe. You can't just take a left turn, right? So, and then those books were very much about Islamic terrorism, which was the threat when Vince was writing. I mean,
Right.
that was what was happening, and thrillers have to be about what's happening. So that threat has certainly died down. It's less, it's less at the forefront of everyone's mind, and the world is changing with breakneck speed. I mean, it's hilarious to think that when I started Fade In, meaning when I sat down with the blank page, AI wasn't really even something people talked about. It was kind of futuristic,
Sure
Star
was.
Trekky stuff. By the time now here I am publishing it, and AI is just a massive mover and shaker throughout the world. I mean, since then, I mean, Hamas has attacked Israel. Now there's a war there. Russia attacked Ukraine. You know, China won. It, it's such a fast moving, a fast paced world now that just writing a book because it takes so long is weird because you think, oh, I should have put more AI stuff in it because um, and so I mean I come from an era where people were still running around town, breathlessly trying to find a payphone, and so this has been really interesting. The other side in the divisions, internally in the United States, the fact that the United States is really, really rethinking its role in the world,
Yeah.
and how that's going to work out, and the fact that that's creating a lot of instability in the world because we've always been kind of the rock everybody clung to,
Yeah.
and we're not going to be that. It doesn't look like going forward, for better or for worse. And so that creates another like interesting thing, and you have the rise that I talk about a lot. These books are kind of about is the rise of the elite class. You're talking about people who are uber wealthy, who are entrenched in politics and have been there. They've been in the Senate for 48 years, since World War II,
Mm-hmm.
90 years old. And these people more and more run the world, and they have more and more influence over us, particularly because, I mean, there's never been a precedent in history that, even if you look at the Soviet Union or, including probably East Germany being the kind of the best control freaks, maybe North Korea now,
Yeah.
but that we stare at those phones, those screens, 8, 9, 10 hours a day,
I know.
and they can control everything we see, every algorithm. They know everything about us, and they can target us. If they want to convince somebody of something politically or however, they can figure out who you are, what you believe, who your friends are, everything you bought, where you go. Use all that, stick it all into AI, and build a campaign just for you.
Right.
And they can
Yeah.
do that 100 million times over the course of 10 seconds. And so this is something that I just find really fascinating, that the power, the separation of the elites from the regular people, the amount of power that they're gathering amongst themselves, and whether or not people are comfortable ceding that power. So
Yeah.
that's very much what this is about. Fade gets hooked up with this billionaire who's extraordinarily powerful, but sees the threat of people like him and maybe wants to tamp it down a little bit. And whether that's even possible or desirable, I don't know.
It's definitely to a point now in the world where you kind of go, if you've been in politics for 40, 50 years, are you still doing it for the people, or is there a power that you're seeking or trying to keep control of? And I definitely question some of those things. And like you said, we have all this media now and all these tools. It's very easy to drive a campaign and show me ads on my Facebook and on my TikTok timeline that are, geared just towards me. And AI for me is interesting, but it's also very dangerous. I've had a lot of conversations with folks like yourself and other experts where, AI has its pros and cons, and and just I think it was yesterday. The CEO of Netflix was saying that they are using generative AI to help them finish up visual effects in some of their projects because it does it 10 times faster and 10 times cheaper. And in the publishing world, they've kind of pushed back on AI and say AI is not going to create original works of art in the publishing world. And so kind of just you peel back the layers of the onion and go, okay, AI is cool. I can go into Chat GPT and I can ask it a question, or I can ask it to draw me a picture of something and I can get a reference, and it's kind of cool that way. But then when it comes to work, there's been some CEOs who've said we're going to use AI to replace half of our workforce by 2045. You go, well, hold on. What are those people going to do for jobs? Now what? So what do you think of the bigger picture of AI when it comes to kind of some of those pros and cons?
It's really interesting. I don't want to be a Luddite. Every time a new technology comes out, people freak out, whether it was machines that could do things on the production line better or whatever, power tools. So, you don't want to be too alarmist. Mm-hmm. I think the power of AI, at some point though, the power of machines is going to be really dangerous. I mean, they only have to get so good at things. So, and are they better than us? Yeah. In a lot of instances, flat out, they are cheaper, faster, more efficient, more effective. And it is going to be an interesting world because my sense, and this is kind of an existential threat that people don't talk as much about, that worries me with a lot of this stuff is, and I talk about it in the book a little bit, if there's an old saying that everybody knows, idle hands are the devil's work. And there's never been a more truthful saying than that. If you take people's kind of what they're striving for, right? Like what they work every day, they go to work every day, they accomplish something, they're tired at the end of the day or anything. This idea that a lot of people have, I think that they've put forward that, well, when you don't have to do that, you'll have time to be creative and to read the classics and all that. No, we'll start wars and kill each other. We will find reasons to hate each other, and we will burn the world down.
Yeah.
A friend of mine once told me, man, the world would be so much better off if everybody was a subsistence farmer, half starved, don't have a car, can't get very far, so you can't kill your neighbors because you can't reach them. It's too tiring. And that's what humans were meant to do.
Yeah.
And and I thought, that's stupid. And then the more I think about it, I think,
it's kind of spot on.
Guy's got a point. Yeah. You don't want to pass out. You don't want to have a bunch of young, unemployed men with unlimited access to military grade weaponry running around. You want young men to be really tired at the end of the day and wondering how they're going to pay their mortgage, because then they won't get themselves in too much trouble. So
stay focused.
I think that's it. Yeah, stay focused. Exactly. And so that's one of the threats that I think people don't consider that much, is how is this going to affect society? Because even if people have money and time and all that, is that going to be a positive thing? I think in my book, one of the things that this billionaire group does in the beginning, not too much of a spoiler, is they kill a company that has done a really, really good job with driverless cars. And they realize that this guy is going to be able to put fully autonomous cars on the road in like a year, and they're going to be flawless. And their point, very much like your point, is, well, the number one job for males in America is driving in some capacity. Uber, taxis, tractors, trucks, whatever. Mm-hmm. So we are going to, over the course of like 3 years, put every single one of those guys out of work. And what are they going to do then, other than cause a lot of trouble? So they feel like, we'll let you implement this as a safety feature, but we need to continue to give people the illusion that they actually are in control of the car. Now, if you're going to hit a group of nuns, the car will take over, but otherwise you do what we'll pay you to do these jobs. And I think that's going to be more and more, prevalent. I think if I had a kid going into the workspace today, I'd say, instead of going to spending 250 grand on college, have you considered like plumbing? Because I can tell you where I live, plumbers charge about 275 an hour,
I know.
and
It's
AI ain't ever
crazy.
taken that job.
No, that's what I've told my
So
boys because I have a 20-year-old and almost an 18-year-old, and I've told them both the same thing. Like, I went to school and I got my education. I have a very good paying government job, and that's the route I took after I left the Air Force, and I said, that's not the route you have to take, and guys don't want to join the military. That's fine. I said, but don't turn your nose away to anything because the world still very much needs those things, those trade jobs, those skills. And they saw it because when we sold our old house, we had some repairs we had to do, and they saw some things that I was trying to get done this year, regardless, before we decided to sell. And I was just kind of sharing with them, like, I paid the plumber $550 to come over here, and they're like, he was only here for like 2 hours. And I was like, yeah, he charged me $550 to fix like a couple feet of pipe. I was like, yeah, his employer is, getting some of that too, but like, you can't replace that experience. I don't have that experience. I can go on YouTube all day long and look up stuff, but I'll never have the experience that he has. Same thing with the electrician. I said, so don't turn away these trade jobs just because they're out in the weather working their butts off. Like, they're working and they're getting paid and they have skills that you can't replace by any other means. So don't look at those and say, don't turn your nose up to them because we will always still need those things.
yeah, and robot technology is a lot slower than I don't think I'll live long enough to, to think or to have a robot come and fix my toilet. But I probably will live long enough that my doctor will be AI. You just
Yeah.
get online and there'll be some nice person that you think is real talking to you, and then they'll say, "Oh, I think this is your problem. You've got to get these tests. I've already scheduled them for you."
Mm-hmm.
And then the AI will deal with that, and then they'll say, "Well, you need these drugs," and I've already talked to the AI at the pharmacy. They're all ready for you. And but or my lawyer will be AI. So it's a it's an interesting thing too, and it's also interesting in that it's cutting out these lower level jobs. Like
Mm-hmm.
think about law. If all that work that low level lawyers, for right out of school, if that work doesn't exist anymore, how do you get the high level lawyers? Where do they come from? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's going to be a really interesting challenge for the world going forward. But I mean, it's also going to have some amazing benefits. I mean, I think about, being able to go see a doctor 24 hours a day who could spend 2 hours with you if you want. And when you tell them what's wrong with you, they can go through every study, 100,000 studies in a tenth of a second and analyze all of them. I mean,
Yeah.
there are a lot of really interesting benefits to that. So who knows? But the change is breakneck, and
Yeah, it is.
I think it's making a lot of people uncomfortable and driving a lot of people a little crazy. So
Well, it
the
is
drawback
change,
there.
and people tend to stiff arm change and go, "Oh, I don't like that." But if you look back to the early 2000s when we went from flip phones to introduction of the iPhone, and people said a touchscreen phone will never work. There's people who flat out told Steve Jobs and those guys at Apple, like, that will never work. People will never accept a touchscreen phone. And what the heck do they need their calendar in their phone for? And music. Why do they need to have everything in their pocket? What's the point in that? And then it just exploded.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine being born in like, yeah, I mean, can you imagine being born in 1600? So your life expectancy to die in 1650 and nothing would have changed.
Mm-hmm.
Like not a single thing. And now it's like you wake up in the morning and think, oh my God, my brand new phone's obsolete.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Like my kids have been born in a technology age. They don't not know anything else. Like they didn't like telling them stories of like when the internet was first introduced and we had to dial in, like you would sit there and wait for 5 to 10 minutes for your connection to connect before you could just get on the internet. And I'm like, you can pull it out of your pocket right now and Google something in an instant. Like you don't know the way things have changed since when I was born and the introduction of some of these things. You never got to witness them, so you don't understand the value and how it's changed life. Whereas my kids are like, they'll complain when the internet's out because they can't get on their Xbox for the 5th hour in a row. And I'm like, oh, your life's so horrible. Like, come on. But yeah, technology and the way it moves is so interesting in what's being introduced now. And to go back to Fade, in the beginning of Fade In, Fade is kind of waking up to a new world. For you, how did you kind of introduce him again, waking up from the coma? Spoiler alert. How did you kind of introduce him again?
Well, I went back in his life and did a couple of flashbacks that sort of established who he was. And it's easy to do a flashback to somebody who's coming out of a coma because they would actually have that. They would be confused about place and time and all these things. So I did a couple of chapters that show sort of how he got there in that coma to some extent. And then you could, as he's recovering from that coma, it was easy time to build his character and his view of the world, and in a way to show how he's trying to catch up. He's been out for a few years, and I think I think he says at some point, what happened? Like nobody knows if they're a boy or a girl, and some woman named Taylor Swift rules the world. And and you think, oh, those are things that a few years ago weren't a thing.
Nope.
So, and it just shows how quickly everything moves. I mean, I've always thought, if Vince Flynn could look at the world today, I mean, he's been gone for like 13 years or something, he would see a world that he didn't recognize hardly at all. So,
Yeah.
And I used to think about that a lot because I was trying to do with the Vince Flynn stuff, like stay really true to the themes and the feel of that book. And then I realized one day, man, all those themes are kind of gone now. Like it's really different. The world is really different. And so how do you deal with that? And with Fade, this was very much about kind of marking it to 2025, that I was going to start this universe with reality, all the things that we're dealing with now and all the things that are right around the corner. And how does he deal with them and how does the world deal with them? And then what are those new threats? And one of the interesting things I think about threats is, and I've been fascinated with this my whole life, is the idea as technology builds, individuals can become very, very powerful, right? So you think about, I once read an article, and it was true, that pretty much the entire anti-vaccination movement started with 12 people. And that was like 90% of it. They have incredible power to reach millions and millions of people with their message. Or biotechnology. This relates to this in this book a little bit, that one guy with a PhD could do a lot of damage in the world with stuff that he can get off Amazon. And so this is the question that my character is asking, is there's a certain amount of control that needs to be that we need to keep things from flying off the rails. On the other hand, you can take that too far into dictatorship. And so where is that line drawn? And it's a really gray line. And I've always liked playing with the gray between the black and the white. So it's it's a little bit of intention. Like, do you intend this to be good or intend this to be bad, as opposed to what you actually do? So this guy knows that he needs to take a lot of control, but he wants to do so in a way that doesn't really take away people's, general freedom of expression, and all these things. So where do you? That's a tightrope that's really hard to stay on.
Yeah. Now, for this book, you've got the introduction of some new characters. And how did you build the team around Fade to kind of usher in this new, I don't want to call it a reboot, but kind of a reintroduction of it? Because a lot of your fans that you got through, writing the Mitch Rapp books, are maybe looking at Fade for the very first time. How did you build the team around him to kind of build that foundation for reintroduction?
Yeah, I thought his team, I felt like this guy that's putting together the team is super rich and super powerful, and he could have the very best. He can buy them. And he's very good at giving people what they want. It's kind of his talent. And kind of coercing and persuading people, including very powerful billionaires, to be on his program. And so what I wanted to do, and I have the scenes of, I figured it would just be very much like Buds, and it would be kind of a tryout. They'd pull some of the top operators in the world in and see who made it through something that's even more intense than Buds. And then Fade kind of comes in. He's a little grandfathered in because they want him. So he kind of comes in at the end of that. And I wanted people that would be interesting, that would be different than him and would have an interesting dynamic with him. So he has one, Fade's a little gonzo. He drinks too much. He has a crazy sense of humor. He's a bit of a prankster. So I kind of juxtaposed him with Danny, who's very, very stoic and quiet, a former SAS guy. And then Linnea, who's a former Finnish sniper, and she is very by the book, and she doesn't like Fade because she considers him a little out of control.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fun dynamic because Fade's such a larger than life, cool kind of, he's a killer, but he's a really fun guy, fun killer. The most fun you can have with a mass murder. And so she really intrigues him because everybody likes him. And he said, I think it's not in this book, but the next book, where he's like, yeah, like dogs, cats, children, old people. He's like, everybody loves me, and she hates me, and he just can't stop poking at her because he loves it, So I wanted to have people who could interact and have conversations and a rapport that would be interesting, but still have, a little bit of tension.
Oh, I love the dynamic between Linnea and Fade. In fact, I want to know more about Linnea. Like, tell me your thoughts of coming up with her, because she is such a unique kind of a bit of a spitfire, but because Fade kind of lights the match and drops it on the can of gasoline, knowing it's going to rile her up.
Yeah, and Fade's a little suicidal, particularly at the beginning of it. So he doesn't, there's a little bit of a difference between courageous and suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
And so he does things, he puts himself in danger in ways that, would not really be acceptable in combat. And so because she's very much by the numbers, that absolutely drives her crazy. And it really drives her crazy that everybody considers him such a hero and loves him. And she's like, you completely screwed that up. You're lucky you're not dead. If it weren't for me, you'd definitely be dead. And he's like, oh, you're taking this too seriously. Relax.
Yeah, I really like her as a character. She was one that jumped out to me, reading through it. And I'm not done with the book quite yet, but just reading through it so far, I'm like, I really like her as a character. Is there any kind of thought in your mind or plan to expanding the world of Fade at all?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is a universe that's just getting started. So, if I write 20, my age, that might be unlikely, But yeah, I mean, that world will just build. You know, it'll take on history, more characters. What happens with him and Raya? I don't know. Um, you know, John Lowe and he have a weird relationship. Will he stay with John Lowe because he's really not sure that that the guys they're doing the right thing or not?
Mm-hmm.
And Fade, while he does kill a lot of people, he does have a moral compass, and so which is one of the things that John Lowe likes about him. So does he want to get dragged into all this? And Lowe, I see as a guy that's, I think, Fade describes him as either the most put together guy in the world, or a guy who's just hanging on by a thin thread. And so, what's Lowe's future? I mean, does he start to lose it? Because I could see that happening to him. I mean,
Yeah.
but I don't know because I don't really plan those things out. The characters take their own path and I follow along. So who knows? Maybe Lowe turns out to be super put together. Maybe completely loses it and ends up in a in a home. I have no idea.
So you mentioned a second book. You've obviously got that in mind and building the world. Um, how do you kind of approach things now that you have a little more freedom to do that? And I'm not saying that you were, you know, handcuffed by being in the Mitch Rapp universe, but that universe was very much focused around Mitch Rapp, and now you have Fade and all the characters and all the world that comes with it. So, what are your plans to kind of do with that and grow and kind of expand? Are you going to pull Andrews and Wilson and give us 3 or 4 books a year?
Never. I am not that hardworking. Honestly, I don't know how people like those guys. I just had dinner with those guys not too long, and I don't even get it. I mean, I have a hard time just getting the one done. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the Mitrop stuff is interesting because it's funny that I would not say that the publisher or Vince's agent really ever put any handcuffs on me at all. I mean, I I had a ton, I had pretty much free hand with that thing, but the handcuffs I put on myself because it's the old if it ain't broke, right?
Yeah.
That was a great series with great characters, great history, a great trajectory, and I wanted to stay true to that. So the things that Fade's, some of these weird modern problems, his attitude toward them and everything is very different than anything I would have felt comfortable with, writing Mitch Rapp into. So um, that has really freed me up to do whatever I want. And that's a complicated situation because, as we've been saying, the world changes really quickly. The world's complicated. The threats are longer term. They are not, an Arab guy walking into the United States with a nuclear bomb, right? It's a simple setup. There's going to be a simple resolution to these things. You could write a phenomenal book about that. But, I mean, an example that I don't write about, but would be like climate change. That's kind of a slow emergency in which does not really set up a great thriller novel, right? It's going to get hot over the next 30 years, right? So
Yeah.
there's not a lot of running and jumping and shooting you can do. So these, it's really interesting because you have to, these threats that are, I think, incredibly dire, AI, whatever, the battle, this sort of battle to the death between Republicans and Democrats that's going on in the United States, our changing role in the world, whether that's good or bad, et cetera, et cetera. Um, these are things that it's a little more challenging to plot out and to create an exciting, fast-paced book about. But on the other hand, if you spend the time, they are really interesting because they're very thought-provoking too. Like you can project out what's going to happen. What is the threat from AI? How can it go horribly wrong? And how can Fade, fix it? So And then it's really hard to plan ahead. So because you don't know what's going to be happening.
Yeah.
So I just finished the first draft of the next book, but I haven't even considered what I'm going to write next. And I don't know, it can be a little paralyzing. I notice a lot of my friends are going back in time, and doing a little bit historical kind of stuff. Um,
Well,
and I
yeah. I
think
mean,
maybe that's because you think, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this? I don't even know what's around the corner. So, we could be at war with China
yeah.
next week.
Hmm.
we it would make no sense at all. That's one of the other things I think that's hard now is our people and more so countries are making decisions that don't make any sense. And so, you got to predict if you're a thriller writer because it takes you 2 years really probably from start to when it's actually published, close to 2 years, and you don't want to get ahead of history. So but when you something like probably the craziest things that ever happened in recent history would be Hamas attacking Israel.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
It's like me going up in a bar and slapping Mike Tyson and telling him to get out, that I want his chair. How did they think that was going to go?
Yeah.
Um, so, and it went exactly like I could have told you. The same thing with Russia. I wrote a book once, a Mitch Rapp book about uh, Russia invading its neighbors, called Red War. But I wanted to do that book, but I couldn't think of a single reason that you could realistically motivate the Russian president to do something like that because it was going to be a disaster, 100%, no bones about it,
Yep.
100% going to be
Yep.
a disaster. And your upside is you gain land when you're already the largest country in the world and don't have a very large population. So I gave him a brain tumor, which and then so he really did that as a distraction to keep all the vultures around him from trying to kill him and take his power, right? And I was like, oh yeah, that works. But nobody would ever in their right mind do that without some major motivation like that. Well, how wrong I was.
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of things that make it really challenging. In fact, I have a friend who just wrote a book and got ahead of history and now is having to do a fairly significant rewrite. So,
Mm.
it's yeah, it is. It's really tempting to say, be like, oh, I think I'm going to do a historical thriller, the British Navy in 1800 or something.
Well, and I mean, just some of the events that have gone on lately, like, we went in there and bombed Iran. Like, that was not
Yeah.
something I thought would ever be in the cards. Like, why would we, why would we want to ever consider doing that? Like, Iran is a loose cannon. We don't know what's under the surface of that, what they're really capable of, and I don't think we want to test that. But we sent two B 2 stealth bombers in there and absolutely did what we said we would potentially do. And I mean, even to me, I was like, I know what we're capable of. I know the current administration's probably not going to back down if they say something. And then we did it. And it was like, but we also didn't see Israel and Iran launching ballistic missiles at each other. And then let alone us getting involved. And then it just was like, it's kind of we're in a current climate of shocking surprises. And it's like, who's next? What's the next shocking thing going to be? Because,
Well, it is. And
yeah, because I
I
absolutely
mean,
did not
yeah,
see that happen.
these again, in America is yeah, America's become very hard to predict, which was not the case before. So, you have an administration that's very, very against meddling in other countries, very much America first. And then, yeah, it seems like the Trump administration would be the last people to get involved in the bombing of Iran with no grander strategy. So it's, yeah, actually, and it's been in place forever. Never write about Iran. And
Yeah.
so the but that would be one. Like, you think, oh man, I just wrote an entire novel about us bombing Iran, and now I got to throw it in the garbage. So
Yeah, because you thought it would
it's
never happen, and it did.
it's very interesting. I mean, yeah, you think, oh, this is safe. Yeah, exactly, and that's why I never write about Iran really. And yeah, it is really interesting. I mean, the dynamic between us and our allies is really changing. Something I'm very sensitive to because I live half my life in Spain,
Right.
and so uh, they're reacting to this and changing the way they work, and I think that's going to have kind of a long tail, and it'll be interesting to see how that affects sort of the thriller business, um, and whether that's going to work out for us. I mean, it's also interesting, the idea that America, which has always been a central player in the world, and in a way is the only central player in the world. We're really the only country that is capable of acting on a very global scale. Whether it's COVID or some outbreak in violence somewhere, we have that capability, which nobody else does. And the vacuum that it'll create if we decide to walk away from that, um, it'll be interesting to see who fills it, how it's filled, and if we turn into from a unilateral world into kind of a multilateral world where you've got kind of the U.S. in our backyard, but we don't
Yeah.
do much outside it. You got Europe over there in Western Europe. You've got Asia run by China, and how that plays out. The and the answer is it's super interesting to deal with, but it's really hard to predict.
Yeah. It'd be nice if it just stay in the pages of fiction books and not become reality ever.
Yeah, it definitely would. But I don't know. May you live in exciting times, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's never boring.
Well, Kyle, I've had you on here for about 50 minutes now. Fade In is going to be out here in a few days on July 29th after people hear this episode. So you should definitely order your copy. It's a fantastic book. It's great to see Fade back. It's great to see you kind of, not reinventing yourself, but really kind of getting out there and doing something, new and creative again. And I know people miss you in the Mitch Rapp series. I know I do, but Don's doing a great job. I wish you the best of luck with this book. I know it's going to do well because it's a fantastic story so far. I'll give you your few seconds to tell people where to go to find more about you, follow along, how to join Fade Nation, and how to get the book.
Yeah, so Kyle Mills, author, on kind of the places, right? X, Facebook, Instagram, and then kylemills.com. You can just go to my website. If you want to sign up for my newsletter, always got stuff going on, and you can figure out when you can get the book, where you can get the book, which should be everywhere. And I'll be on a tour. So I'll be in Texas, I'll be in St. Paul, and I'll be in Phoenix. So if you live in near any of those places, you come out and check it out.